Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the start of week number 11 of lockdown here in the US. And obviously, the very first webinar of the week after Memorial Day weekend here in the United States. Really excited and absolutely delighted today to be able to welcome Sarah McQuade, whom, if many of you are unfamiliar with Sarah, then I will preface this introduction by saying I think you are in for a real treat, but be prepared to have maybe some of your thoughts or assumptions questioned and challenged, and kind of begin a journey towards better understanding many of the really intricate details that make us as coaches and the relationships that we can form with our players a special one. So Sarah, thank you ever so much for obviously sharing your Tuesday evening, landlocked in the UK right now with us. On behalf of, Sarah's joining us on behalf of an exciting partnership that Beyond Pulse are entering into with MiMentor. So for many of you who saw the introductory graphics about this presentation, you will have noticed that Sarah is obviously has her ETC coaching consultants organization, but she's also involved in the coach development and coach education and programming operations of MiMentor, which is an online coach education platform that you guys will learn a ton more about over the recent weeks, and something that we're excited to be able to extend to the Beyond Pulse membership. James Baker is on the line there, who is a digital programs manager for MiMentor as well. So James might pop up in this conversation, but we'll be sure to announce some more material that will link you guys to the great work that MiMentor currently do off the back end of this conversation, whether it's live now or obviously those that are viewing on demand. So as ever, I have Mr. Mark Wilson alongside me, Tom Shields, and those that are joining us live, obviously, please be prepared and ready for a lot of engagement here. Use the chat function at the top of your screen to respond to some of the prompts and questions that Sarah might pose to you throughout this conversation. And obviously, if there are any questions throughout that you want to ask, please just pop your message up in there and we'll be sure to try to direct Sarah's attention to it. So as ever, thank you all for joining us and choosing Beyond Pulse as your dose of education today. And we'll look forward to getting straight into this. So Sarah, if you could, just before you start to challenge everybody that's listening, we know why you're so special and the great history that you have, but could you provide a quick 2-minute intro or bio to the rest of the listeners, so they can learn a little bit about who you are and well, where you're coming to us from?
Thanks, Tom, for putting me completely on the spot. I'm here by and large because I'm really quite old. I have been in this coach development game, golly, for at least 20 years. The first half was in the UK, the second half was in the USA. And really what I have spent all of this time doing is not just designing programs for coaches, but really helping coaches think differently about how they do what they do, so that they might do it differently or better. So that's really the thinking. And again, thanks ever so much for the opportunity today to join you. Thanks to James for roping me in originally, and thanks to for the boys for this invitation. But it really is all about you guys, and what I don't want to do, and I recognise we're in a world where we have been absolutely saturated with webinars. What I don't want to do is to just talk at you or throw the same old stuff at you that you might have already experienced. So what I do want to do is using a bit of a mix of stuff, and none of it comes from soccer, and I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and I certainly won't apologise for it, but really want to just help you think not about the X's and O's, but about the other stuff that's so important. So on that note, if you guys can access the chat function, I'm just going to ask you to answer the question in the chat box. Just pick 2 or 3 words that you believe describe excellent coaching practice. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think and add. And Richard Scott, if you're not the first one to write this down, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, Richie, you've been called out, mate. You've got to be
Yeah.
teaching. So, and just for the benefit of everybody listening, obviously what we had titled this conversation was going to be, it's not what you coach that counts as much as how. So please be prepared for some thought-provoking commentary. So,
Thank you, Mark. You win first is finger first.
I think people are shy. Maybe it's a hangover from Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you, Aaron. Fabulous. So for those of you who can't see the chat box, we've got love, learning, trust, developing and guiding, engagement, development, inclusion, respect, commitment, connection, reflection, fun, playing the game, care, engagement, fun, engagement, empowering, inclusion, trust, transformative, empowering. Those are fabulous, and there is absolutely no right or wrong. Really, what we're most interested in are the skills that sit behind this that allow you to become an unbelievably coach and also enable high quality coaching experiences. Because very simply, if we think about this as a simple cascade, the better you are, the better your athletes and the better their experiences. So let's just sort of move on a little bit. So let's hold on to those words because that's really important. And Tom's right. We could have titled this any number of things, but really what we wanted to do was to get away from the X's and O's and have you start thinking about how you do what you do. So in terms of today's intent, just in terms of where we're going, and what I will say is there is not enough content here to fill the hours. So really happy for you guys to ask questions. We can unmute microphones, we can put the video on, we can even sort of have a Q&A if we feel that that's going to be really important too. So it's the excellent coaching piece. We'll make a really clear distinction between the what to and the how to coach skills, and some of you will already be familiar with this language. We'll start to have a think about where and how questioning, not just what questions you ask, but how you ask the questions, how those appear as a discrete skill set within the quality coaching agenda. And we'll also think about helping you do this whole questioning piece far better than you currently do. So just to give you a bit of a context, and again, some of you will be familiar with this, excellent coaching historically was always defined by how much you knew about the sport. So, you know, technical expertise in the sport and how well you could coach it. And that was where we spent all of our time from a coach education and a coach development perspective. Now, what researchers and what coaching providers are beginning to understand that actually there are two other pieces of knowledge and skills that are unbelievably important. One of which is your ability to connect and communicate with others. And we're talking, yes, obviously about the players, but it's also your ability to connect and communicate with support staff, with other coaches, with administrators, and critically with parents as well. They are also part of this game. So whilst they are not the client exactly, they certainly are the consumer that we have to be ever so mindful of. And the third piece is this ability to commit to getting better. This is how well I know myself and how well I can improve my performance. Because if we come back to better coaches make better athletes, then I need to be unbelievably good as a coach. And that onus is on me in terms of my independent commitment to lifelong learning. But really, where we're going to spend some time today is really this coaching pedagogy piece. So this is so everything we're talking about today assumes that you have got a really strong tech foundation. And what we're talking about is not what you do, it's how you do it. So just in terms of that really clear distinction, just notice the difference. So on one hand, we're talking about the content around what is being coached, and we refer to that as the what to coach skills. The other side of the coin that I am super interested in are the coaching process skills. So this isn't necessarily what you coach, it's how you coach. It's how you organize, how you explain, how you demonstrate, how you observe, how you analyze, how you generate and provide feedback. These are the how to coach skills. And again, think back to your own coaching education. Who ever taught you how to provide a high quality demonstration? Who ever taught you how to observe unbelievably well? And these are lots of the things that we don't dwell on from an education perspective or a coach development perspective. We just assume that coaches will pick this up by osmosis. But actually, we can't rely on osmosis to develop unbelievably good coaches. There is a sort of a commitment to developing excellence. And really, that's the sort of the start of this now. And really what I want to zone in on are the questions piece. So what I'm really keen for you to do, use the chat box, and I'm going to ask you just to reflect on your coaching. So reflect on the sort of the on the field coaching and just start to think for a minute and put a ratio on it for me. How many questions do you ask versus how much telling do you do? So 50-50, 90-10? I know the answer is it's going to depend, but really over time, what's the balance? Thanks, Rich. Yeah, yeah. Zico, thank you for your honesty. So now I'm going to ask you to just use the chat box again. Is Michael, I'm just laughing at your comment. No need for apologies. Just to ask you, just to again jot down in the chat box, for what reasons do you use questions? So why do you use them? What's the purpose behind them? Let's just get a sense of what's driving the questioning piece in your game. Lovely. So then, for those of you that can't see the chat box, require the players to think, draw answers and seek clarification, look for understanding, seek to understand the level of understanding, gauge understanding, provoke thoughts, guide them to problem solve. Lovely, thank you, Kelly. Tom, STD.
Not ST, no. Try again, not an STD. SDT.
Sorry. That'll learn me for the speed reading. I haven't seen that acronym before.
Self-determination theory.
Thank you. Spark curiosity, understanding, inclusion, feel valued. Lovely. Yeah, Mark, so I can understand what the player does or doesn't understand. Check understanding. Brilliant. Thank you. So that's a great one to finish, to help them find their own understanding of the answer. And again, let me just share with you Lynn Kidman, who is, she's done a huge amount of work in and around this concept of athlete-centered coaching. And in terms of the answer to the question why we use questions, this is what she had to say. So when we ask questions, players must find an answer. So it can increase knowledge and understanding. We ask questions because it stimulates players' thinking, providing them with a chance to be creative and learn about their own game. This in turn can stimulate their intrinsic motivation to learn. Again, you know all of this, but just echoing what the research says. Also, as players generate solutions, they will remember, understand, and apply their solutions more effectively than if they were simply given information. And I think that bit's really important. And what I want to do is just take you back to a point that Rich made in the chat box, and he used the words push-pull. So if we look at these three definitions on the screen, that first bullet really refers to push type questions. Those are coach-centered questions. So actually I use questions to check knowledge, check understanding. But on a deeper level, if you have a look at those second and third bullets, I can actually use questions to stimulate thinking, raise awareness, encourage problem solving, and also help players take more responsibility for their own performance, not just in terms of the outcome of their performance, but in terms of the process to develop their performance. There is one thing about questioning, it's kind of difficult to do unbelievably well, and it is a time thief, which is inevitably why the majority of coaches will always lean towards telling. But what I'm going to do is to take you outside of your comfort zone a little bit, and I'm going to share with you what I believe is one of the best pieces of coaching footage I have seen. And again, it would come under the banner of athlete-centered coaching footage, but it's one of the best examples I've seen of questioning. So I'm going to share with you a piece of footage. It's cricket. Some of you will be mildly reassured because you're familiar with the game. Others of you will be thinking, what? And I actually think for those of you who don't know the game at all, you're going to be able to focus unbelievably well on what it is the coach does. So what I want you to do, and we'll show this a couple of times, is I want you to notice the questions that the coach asks. Notice how he uses them. Notice when he uses them. So notice the words that he chains in. Notice how he lets the question land. Notice how he engages the athlete. So just notice what you notice. Now let's see if we can get this video working. Tell me about the volume, Tom, Mark, if you...
Right, so how would you normally do your start? Right, and we'll just through what that would be.
Okay, I'll just start. Just stand there and bowl from there. Just bowl a few.
Right.
And then just to make sure everything's...
Sorry, fellas.
Step and just get a feel.
Right.
And then go.
Hello, maybe you can turn your camera
on. Sorry, let's just try that again.
And how do you find standing drills generally?
Yeah, I think...
Right, so how long?
I can't get this any louder, so let's see what happens.
How do you standing start? Right, just talk me through what.
Okay, I'll just start. And just stand there and bowl from there. Just bowl a few.
Right.
And then just to make sure everything's feeling right, and then I just bowl a couple of a step and just get a feel.
Right.
And then go back.
And how do you find standing drills generally?
Yeah, I think I find them quite helpful, but I don't like overdoing them. I find it quite helpful just to make sure everything's going right in the crease.
Right. Well, what we'll do is I'll just have a look at you. I wouldn't mind seeing you doing your standing drills.
Yeah.
And then get you rolling in, bowling at the target, and we'll just go with the flow. All right.
Right.
Here's your target. Where are you going to put it?
I'll put it 10 feet from the stump.
Is that the length that you tend to bowl?
Yeah.
10 feet. Well, when you say 10 feet,
10,
that's
not
oh,
10.
okay.
Just about there.
Okay, so you do your normal standing start routine, and I'll just have a look, and we'll see how you go. What are the key things you're thinking about while you're doing this?
I'll try and just give it a rip, and then my next stride, I try and get in a straight line.
Right. Okay.
That's one of my weaknesses. I'll sometimes go there and block the beyond path. So
When you don't quite complete your action, what happens to the ball? Anything different?
It just sort of goes on.
So there's no real shape.
Yeah.
So when you get your shoulders and your hip through,
Spins more.
and you get more shape.
Yeah.
Okay.
How is the volume there? Just give me a sort of a thumbs up or thumbs down.
The volume seems okay, Sarah. It's just it's obviously a little bit jumpy now that we have more people trying to listen and the streaming.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm not actually too worried about the jumpiness. It's the volume. Do I need to play it again, or thank you, Dean, that's a thumbs up. Okay, so just reflecting on the 2 minutes that you have seen, what I'm really keen for you guys to do is just think about how he has used the questions. So use the chat box just to summarize what it is you noticed about what it is this particular coach did to help the athlete learn. Michael, you beat me to it. Thank you. Lovely. Non-threatening body language, palms together, open-ended questions, waits for an answer, encourages responses, right? More depth from the athlete, very calm. Deeper thought, more direct, requires quick answers. Michael, that's a brilliant summary. Silence in between. What, why, and where questions. Yep, Tom, you're absolutely right. It was a progressive conversation. Yep, open-ended, specific, ask the players with clarity. So in terms of all of the different reasons why he asked questions, what we can see is that he was using questions for the very same reason that you guys were using questions, which is to check, clarify, push, probe, and also encourage the player to get some of the answers as well. He is letting the player lead. Yep, this would be stereotypical athlete-centered coaching. Dean, I might get you to explain ipsative. I haven't seen that before.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Does that come through?
I can, loud and clear.
Yeah, so
yeah,
ipsative allows the athlete or the learner to set standards and targets based on their own previous experience. So if he's, like when he's talking about the distance he's bowled, he's setting that standard based on his own experience, and it's not the coach that's leading him to that decision. He's just kind of on the journey with the player.
Absolutely, thank you. That is brilliant. Yes, no, I haven't seen that before. Lovely. So now I want you just to think about your own coaching. So just, I mean, and obviously this isn't something that you could do all day, every day. You know, this is, you know, something that requires a significant investment of time and energy to do well. Sorry, I've got one eye in the chat box. Michael, isn't the coach leading? Aren't his observation and questions so intentional that he is leading but not making the play? Michael, that's not a question, that's a phenomenal observation. Because at the end of the day, yes, you're right, the coach is absolutely leading the player to where he's going. And to use Richard's point earlier, the coach is absolutely pulling, not pushing. And there's a very genuine commitment here to pull, not push. But whilst we're just sort of on that, let me just share with you the next slide, which actually does a deeper dive into all of the different reasons why we would ask questions. And again, just notice what you notice.
How long would you normally do your standing start?
Sorry, bear with. So just notice what you notice about the different reasons that pop up. And what I will do is, Dean, he's letting the player lead because he's on the right tracks, absolutely. And if the player wasn't on the right tracks, you can damn well sure this coach would have told him what to do. But at the minute, it is a very intentional approach. But again, let me share with you all of the reasons why coaches ask questions. What I want you to do is to think about your own coaching. So when you have a look at each reason that comes round, just ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all, 10 being all the time, how well do you use these questions? So how often and how well do you use these questions? So let me share them with you. So just thinking about your own coaching, how well, how often do you use these different types of questions in your coaching? And again, if anybody is brave enough to share in the chat box, that would be fab.
It's all gone quiet, Sarah.
I know. I know this is the hardest bit, is keeping quiet and saying nothing whilst waiting for somebody just to be brave enough to comment on their questions. Thank you, Tom. And again, there is a huge amount of work being done at the minute to look at reflective questions, just in terms of how coaches can use questions to encourage the reflection on action process. And it's a bit of an art form, I will say. Oh, bear with, sorry. Kelly, that's a really interesting point. I think a lot of questions, but perhaps not by design. Zico, you're absolutely right. Inevitably, the questions that you ask before you even get on the field are the most powerful questions in terms of the relationships piece. And it is the relationship that's absolutely critical. And again, because it doesn't matter how good your questions are, if there isn't a good relationship, you're never going to help the player to learn. So, Richard Scott, you're not allowed to answer this question. What's the difference between the red questions and the green questions? Mark, thanks for your honesty there. I don't measure or record my questions or responses accurately enough when I coach. Honest. So yeah, Rich, you can't answer, but what's the difference between the red and the green? Good one, Kelly. Yeah. Green is all about them. So the green questions really are the athlete-centered questions. And the red ones are the coach-centered questions. So the subtle difference being, if I asked a red question, the answer benefits me as the coach. If I ask a green one, it might not necessarily benefit me more than it will the player. So, and again, please don't confuse red with bad, green with good. They're just colours. So really the red, going back to Richard's comment earlier, are our push questions, and the green are our pull questions. And very simply, we use push-pull as a distinction between, if you think about push-pull on a continuum of coaching styles with push at one end, so that's that absolute autocratic, telling type, do as I say type role, versus the other end of the spectrum, which is that sort of complete sort of laissez-faire and lots of questions. And again, so red does not mean bad and green good, but actually, as a whole, our ability to use questions needs to be really informed. So we really need to think about why we are asking the question. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you this footage again. So another 2 minutes, and this time look at the footage. It's only another couple of minutes. Look at the footage and don't necessarily think about the independent questions that our friend DP, David Persons, is using. Think about how well he moves from red to green. Think about how well he moves from the push end of the continuum to the pull end of the continuum. Notice what you notice, and what I want you to do is to share those observations in the chat box. So let me find my mouse, click to the next screen. Let's just watch it again.
Right, so how long would you normally do your standing start?
15 minutes, 10 minutes, just at the start.
Right, and just walk me through what that would be.
Okay, I'll start. I'll just stand there and bowl from there. Just bowl a few.
Right.
And then just to make sure everything's feeling right, and then I just bowl a couple of like a step and just get a feel.
Right.
And then go back.
And how do you find standing drills generally?
Yeah, I think I find them quite helpful, but I don't like overdoing them. I find it quite helpful just to make sure everything's going right in the crease.
Right. Well, what we'll do is I'll just have a look at you. I wouldn't mind seeing you doing standing drills.
Yep.
Then get you rolling in, bowling at a target, and we'll just go with the flow. All right.
Right.
Here's your target. Where are you going to put it?
I'll put it 10 feet from the stumps.
And is that the length that you tend to bowl?
Yeah.
10 feet. When you say 10 feet,
10,
that's
like not.
Oh,
10.
okay.
About there.
Okay. So you do your normal standing start
Okay.
routine, and I'll just have a look, and we'll see how you go. What are the key things you're thinking about while you're doing this?
I'll try and just do it real, and then my next stride I try and get in a straight line.
Right.
Because
Okay.
that's one of my weaknesses. I'll sometimes go there and block the view of the umpire. Yeah.
When you don't quite complete your action, what happens to the ball? Anything different?
It just sort of goes on.
So there's no real shape.
No,
on it.
yeah. It just
All right. So when you get your shoulders and your hip through,
spins more.
and you get more shape.
Yeah.
On it. Okay.
So just share what it was that you noticed about how this coach of ours moved from push to pull, from red to green throughout that. So let's have a look at those observations. And if you're struggling to offer anything, think about how well you use questions and move from push to pull, and how well you flow from red to green. And if you're brave enough to offer comments on your own coaching practice, I'd be delighted to read those as well. Oh, nice, Mark.
I think.
There was.
I think
Sorry,
so,
go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just saying, I think there were, 9 questions. I think I need to see that again, but definitely a lot more green, Sarah, for sure. For me, anyway, my perspective.
Yeah, and I think, Michael's comment here about an artful dance between push and pull, you're absolutely right. And I think he's right as well. that if the push questions came in, they were really for clarity more than anything, but they were followed by a very quick pull question, which was far more open, which drew far more out of the player to help him think about what he was doing, how he was doing it. And also there was a huge amount here. And if we think about sort of the key phase of the coaching process this is about generating and providing feedback. And what he's done quite artfully is enable the player to generate all of the thinking. So what he's creating is an autonomous, independent player who can sort of, facilitate that error correction detection process themselves. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Matt. Connection between the information provided by the player did impact the sequence of the questions. So what we'd also got, in addition to the questioning, was some real active listening. So everything that we heard from the player informed the next question. Okay, so I am sort of conscious of the time. So let's just think about, we've worked, I think, quite hard to establish why we would ask questions. And again, the real challenge also is in terms of the quality of the answer we get, what words we use in those questions is also really important. So let me just share with you some kind of do's and don'ts. And I think you'll be familiar with this, but this is sort of a bit of a health warning when it comes to what words do we choose to use. And again, so this is the kind of the health warning here. So why would we avoid those questions on the left? Chris, hang on to that about tone, pitch, voice of timing of question. We'll get to that in a minute. So let's just sort of focus on the kind of the constructs. So why would we avoid those questions there? Is, will, do, have, won't, should, don't? No, they're not. They are not open-ended. You're absolutely right. So let me play devil's advocate. Are they actually questions? So the don't you think you could? Wouldn't it be better if? Actually, they're not questions, they're veiled tells. So actually, we're much better off using questions with a slightly better prefix. And again, if you remember what it was, and again, there's nothing wrong with, again, closed questions and some leading questions, absolutely yes, but we really want the player to be thinking for themselves. So let's avoid the veiled tells and let's use conversation starters. And what we do know is that our friend DP used plenty of these. So the what, the how, the when, the tell me, the talk me through. And again, you'll have all of these that you use all the time. Why are we suggesting be mindful of why? I'm not saying we don't ask why. I'm saying be mindful of using the word why. Why would that be? Yeah. And again, Kelly, to use a cricketing phrase, if I think it's wrong, I'm immediately going to be on the back foot. I'm going to be immediately quite defensive because I'm going to assume I've done something wrong. Yeah, Zico, all of those different reasons. But again, we're not saying don't ask the why question. We're saying find another way in. And I actually like the tell me what you were thinking when. What was in your head at that point? What were the different options that you had? What drove the decision making? So again, I'm very much in coaching conversation mode without being in an interrogation. Yeah, understanding the why leads to knowledge and understanding of the process, as you're absolutely right. Tom, you are right. Tone is so important. And again, a couple of you throughout this have started to talk about, and again, for me, it comes under the banner of a question of style. So, Tom, you've just sort of gotten us out of the gates here. So if tone is so important, what else is unbelievably important from a stylistic perspective? So what advice can we steal from DP, and what advice can we steal from other coaches we know that are unbelievably good in the questioning piece? So really what I'm after, team, is your top tips. So I'm not sure whether body language is a question or a statement, but what specifically is it about the body language? So let's just turn those two words into a top tip that we could use to improve our own questioning technique. Yeah, the sentence structure is unbelievably important. How many words you choose to use in a single sentence are unbelievably important. Having the confidence to ask one question at a time and shut up is really important. Yeah, Tom, a great point. An environment with body language that creates an open forum where players aren't scared to be wrong. And actually, if we could create a culture that welcomed failure, how wonderful would that be from a learning and development perspective? Yep, active listener. I'm going to ask a question where our biases haven't formed an answer. So again, that active listening requires us to be utterly objective. Yep, Michael. And some of you who are big, tall, imposing guys, even just being present and being close can be a little distracting and unnerving to players, particularly if they feel that they've done something wrong. Thank you, Michael. Mark, lovely. Simplify the language, recognize emotional responses to words or sentences. And it's interesting. If we're listening with our eyes, we can pick up on so much more than just the words that our athletes choose to share. And I know you think that's a bit silly, but it is absolutely possible to listen with our eyes. Yeah, lovely, down, particularly with the younger players, down to their eye level, taking a knee. So let me just share with you, because I say conscious of the time, and I just sort of, I am going to open it up for a few minutes, but let me just share with you some top tips. Now, these top tips have been informed by both the research and painful personal experiences. So here you go. So in terms of the stylistic piece, in terms of asking unbelievably good questions with your coaching hat on, most importantly, know why you are asking the question. One at a time. Let the question land. So what that means is set up and shut up. Have the confidence to say nothing afterwards and just notice what's happening with the players. Are the eyes moving? Is the head tilting? Do they look like they're thinking? If they are, just leave it alone. Silence is a really, really powerful tool. It can also be your Achilles heel. So just be mindful of when, where, and how long you integrate silences for. Listen unbelievably well, it'll frame the next question. Some of you have mentioned tone and tenor, and the focus, pitch, and level is unbelievably important. Quality follow-ons that are related, particularly in the sort of environment that DP was just in. Make your questions relevant. The random and arbitrary, you're just going to get a kind of a really blank stare. That's what we call a dead quiet. And again, I'm not sure we saw a massive amount of warmth and enthusiasm from DP. What we did see was a real constructive response. So he had quite intentionally heard and digested to inform the next question. I think warmth and enthusiasm helps, but knowing DP as long as I have, not necessarily the case. And actually what's really important here is the conversation, not the interrogation. And the positive body language, the head nods, the body inclinations, the hand gestures are all really important. So if there are any of these that you think that you could steal for your own coaching, feel free to steal it. Take a screenshot or whatever it is you want. But what I am going to do is that if some of this is quite genuinely hitting your radar, I am going to signpost you to a couple of the courses that are sitting on the MiMentor platform, and the ones particularly that you might be interested in are these two. And James, I don't know whether you want to jump in and say anything about these and how they kind of fit with the Beyond Pulse partnership before we just spend a couple of minutes wrapping up with some Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So yeah, say on the MiMentor site, which you can access through the link at the bottom. So that page there gives you some more insight on the courses themselves. So if you click in, you can go in and learn more about the courses Sarah's been talking about just then very briefly. You then, as part of a membership, you will get a discount code that you can use to continue your learning as a bit of a goodwill gesture from both Beyond Pulse and MiMentor. So if you have any questions about them, feel free to sort of get in touch. But effectively, those two courses are there, and as you can see, they will be quite thought-provoking, as you can tell from this webinar. So please go on there and enjoy. And yeah, if you have any questions, then feel free to get involved, and I'm happy to sort of take them via the sort of social media handles or via Tom and Mark on this webinar.
And Michael, I'm not ignoring your question. I don't have a great answer to it. So is there any research on how tone and pitch should match a particular type of question? Golly, I don't know, but what a fabulous piece of research. Let me take it and just sort of throw that one out at sort of colleagues who are in the academic game and know far more than I do about sort of what's cutting edge research. But just in terms of sort of wrapping this up, again, I'm going to throw out the challenge to you. So I know that all of you believe that questioning is a phenomenally useful tool. And I know that you are already probably integrating questioning unbelievably well. It may well be a real strength in your coaching game. So to that extent, I'm going to challenge you to think about how you can turn it into a super strength. So if it's already pretty good, how's it going to get even better? So what will you do? How will you integrate it? How will you know you've been successful? And then how are you going to make it into a super, super, super strength? So I'm just going to throw that out to you. And if there are, it's kind of, we've got about 5 minutes left. So Tom, I'm just really happy to, you know, open it up, take questions, or let people run screaming for the hills, whatever works.
I have one that I'd love to start off with, and it's about the self-reflection piece, Sarah. So how do I know I'm getting better? How do I know I'm improving? And I'm starting to read more and more about AARs, which is the military after action responses. And it talks about how a lot of companies and a lot of individuals post an action or post doing something, they go straight to the why question instead of proceeding with what did we set out to do and what actually happened before you get to the why. So I'm looking at integrating some of that AAR or that process into my own self-reflection. But do you have any other suggestions on how you can measure and record so you can have little check-ins to know if you're improving, certainly with your how from a coach's perspective?
Yeah, I think, and it's a brilliant question. I think a bit like any skill, you have to be really clear on what it is you believe excellent practice is and does. So we really need to have a North Star in mind, an aspirational North Star in terms of what we're aiming for. You know, so this might well be influenced by the research, it might well be influenced by coaches that you have trained under, competed with, coached with, so somebody that you really admire. So have real clarity about what excellence is. And then I think there is something here about being very deliberate in our coaching practice about integrating questions for very specific reasons so that we do it with real purpose. And what I would then do is then be brave enough after the session. So I'd want it recorded. So whether it's an audio record, whether it's a video record, and then ideally I'd want to have a coaching conversation with somebody else, a coach developer, who can literally sort of turn the camera towards me and say, okay, this was what you wanted to do, how well have you done it? And start to use some of that pause record technology and allow people to actually reflect quite critically and quite honestly on how well they used the question, how well they framed it, how well they landed it, what the response was they got from the player, and actually then start to evaluate, well, was it the right question to ask at that moment in time, or would there have been another point within the session?
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that.
Sarah, I just think what you said, and you've kind of touched upon the concept of reflecting in action. So it's not necessarily just reflecting on the quality of the question, but how you can then use that information to potentially impact the decisions you make from a practice design perspective. You know, we haven't really spoken and talked. I'm blending words together. We haven't spoken too much about implications of then how that feedback could impact what you do in the remainder of the session, but being comfortable reflecting on action and reflecting on the quality gained from the questions you asked is going to be kind of integral to that.
Sean, I think I mean, sorry, but the practice design. So if we're really clear, so in the practice design, if we start to think about not just what it is we want the athletes to learn and develop, so in terms of the session structure, the session content, and all of the individual progressions, but if we also think from a pedagogical perspective, how am I going to help those athletes learn? I can then be very intentional about knowing that at this point in the session, I'm going to start to rely on the use of questionings to encourage some very deliberate thinking on what's happening. So if in your practice design, you know that questioning is going to be a go-to tool, that's the session to audio record, video record, and have somebody else to be that critical friend with you afterwards. But you're absolutely right. It's got to come in all phases. I can't just hit and hope with a question during a session and then have a bit of a think about how well it landed. It's very intentional throughout that plan, do, review process.
Yeah. So then, Sarah, we started, and I think one of the first comments you made in this presentation was you're going to assume there is a depth of X's and O's knowledge that's inherent, right, with the coaches listening now or later. My question would be, and based on the example that you gave, how critical is a coach's level of declarative knowledge on how comfortable they're going to be engaging in a two-way interaction and being able to push and pull, as you kind of allude to eke out the specifics of what they want to kind of get the player to be thinking about. What's the relationship there between how much and how much you're then comfortable kind of engaging in an interaction?
It's a really good question. And I wonder, and again, there is something here about sort of, this foundational knowledge of X's and O's. Does that help or does it hinder? Because I know what I know about soccer, you can literally pop on the back of a postage stamp. So in terms of my coaching process skills, I would be heavily reliant on quality questioning to encourage player learning and development. But I do wonder if somebody who has got a huge wealth of that sort of declarative knowledge, are they more likely to tell? Are they more likely to be reliant on their technical skills than they are their questioning skills if they believe this is better than this?
Yeah, I'm just curious about how you could pull out more if you've got a deeper, if your depth of declarative knowledge is significant, how you're comfortable pulling out or potentially guiding, you know, like the example that you just showed. It was, I certainly felt there was a layer of trying to get the player to demonstrate whether they understood why and how they do what they do. And I think from our perspective, a lot of it is if I have a depth of declarative knowledge or procedural knowledge on how something can be executed, I can continue to try and use pull questions to get them to attain the same or a similar kind of understanding. But I can only do that if I know.
Assuming that I recognise, and again, so my dear friend and colleague Linda Lowe has typically she answers every question with a "it depends," but actually, all of this assumes that I understand and welcome the concept of athlete-centered coaching, and I recognise the value that questioning brings to the entire coaching and performance experience. So it doesn't matter how much I know, if I don't embrace the whole athlete coaching philosophy, I'm never going to want to use questions. I'm very genuine. I think it depends. Yeah.
Is there, we've had a couple of webinars, and I'm fascinated with, well, not fascinated, I'm looking at a little bit at cognitive load theory in terms of what your working memory is to access or process and use. In terms of volume of questions, in terms of topic, I guess you've got to be very specific and be conscious of what a child's cognitive load theory or working memory can receive at different ages and stages to, again, plan and frame what you're going to deliver.
Completely.
Okay.
Yeah, completely. And I think which comes back to some sort of intentional practice design. So being really clear on who am I working with? What do they already know? What can they do? What's the reason? What's the purpose for bringing in questions? So if I'm very deliberately going to use, I don't know, a game-based learning approach as the sort of, the key coaching tool throughout that session, then it lends itself really well to a raft of questions. But there are other sessions that potentially might lend themselves to a raft of questions at all. But you're absolutely right. I do need to be mindful of that complete question saturation point, because I remember many years ago golfing with a very dear friend of mine who is a complete whiz in the coach education game, and we were golfing and she was having a terrible round. And she said, look, should you work for the Professional Golf Association? You must be able to help me. Should I am playing dreadfully? And I said, well, would you like me to empower you through questions? And she turned around, and apologies for swearing, she just said, no, just fucking well tell me. So there's just a time and a place. And if you know your players well enough and you can read the relationship, you'll know when there's been a complete saturation point. Because remember here, there's always a time to tell as well. And we can only really pull if there's something to pull on is sort of another sort of, health note there.
Good point. Can we steal you for another 2 hours? Because this has been incredible. Loved it.
Hey, I'm really happy to come back if needs be and or useful.
Sarah, I'm gonna throw another controversial one out there. There's obviously a lot of, I guess what wasn't on one of the explanations for why questions was kind of the motivation of having a peer versus a coach provide an answer, and how, that there's kind of, that can be inspirational in itself for young players. But if a coach is really struggling and the players aren't providing an answer, what, you know, is there a big difference between, you know, me having to tell versus if James doesn't understand and Mark answers, and Mark is James's peer, but James still doesn't really understand how that question was answered in the first place. Is there a big difference between me as the coach saying it and Mark saying it? If it's going to be a tell anyway, and that player doesn't necessarily understand?
Again, it depends. But what I do love is I love the concept of this sort of, you know, peer teaching, peer coaching. So if we do start to think about this, and you know, if we think about, you know, children who are sort of working together, then the phrase that I continually go back to is the think, pair, share. You know, so think together, pair together, share together, and they can be each other's critical friend. But you're absolutely, and particularly when I'm working with larger numbers, then it's easier for me to cascade the responsibility for the learning and development to more of the people within that session, so they become less reliant on looking at me as the coach as some sort of authority figure. But very genuinely, I'm still there to help if, as and when that pair needs any additional information or corrective feedback. So again, it depends.
It always does, right? It always does.
Yeah. Which sounds like a bit of a cop out, but very genuinely, it does.
No, absolutely. And I think that, you know, again, kind of looping it together, I think it's the art of coaching is to understand what is required in any given moment to best impact, you know, the learners that you're faced with, right? Like, how do you continue to motivate, inspire, and teach? You know, reflecting in and on is going to be critical to that. So obviously, guys, we've joked a little bit about the fact that we have reached our hour mark. Obviously, it seems to have been me and Mark in the last 10 minutes, so I apologize for stealing the questioning side of things. On behalf of obviously myself and Mark and the rest of team Beyond Pulse and everybody listening now and again on demand, just thank you so very much for sharing, you know, your time with us this evening in England, this afternoon in the US. James, as always, thank you for setting this up, and obviously again we look forward from a company perspective to being able to share the great work that MiMentor are doing in order to support all of you guys, your coaching and obviously your coaching development and education, and obviously the impact that can hopefully have on the players and parents that you work with as well. So James has popped in the chat the discount code for Beyond Pulse. So there's a BP 2020 code there for 15% off any MiMentor course for anybody who has listened today or is catching this again on demand. But I would just say, Sarah, before we close out, oh, there we go. I was going to say, where can people find you, and how can they learn more about the work that you do? Because I think if this is the first time people have come into contact with you, they'll like us, they will always want more. So please feel free to share how we can find you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind. And just I haven't spelled it terribly well, but very genuinely, and I know these kind of mechanisms are really challenging to sort of, you know, get a really engaging dialogue, but just want to thank you. There's some fabulously high quality contributions, and boys, I don't know how you can do it, but if you can send me a copy of this chat box or what's appeared in the chat box, that would be brilliant. So if there is a way of yes, that would be lovely. But very genuinely, thank you everybody, and lovely to see some old faces again.
Perfect. Well, listeners, obviously thank you for sharing your time with us today. I am going to cut it there. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern, we're joined by Ian Barker. So to continue the conversation around coach education, coach development, we have the United Soccer Coaches Director of Coaching, Ian Barker, joining us tomorrow. So again, please have questions ready for Ian, another great guest with a wealth of knowledge. And then we finish the week with Mr. Todd Bean on Thursday at 12 Eastern. So we're very
better and better.
We started with a bang. It's okay. yeah, we look forward to obviously welcoming everybody back again. And just once more, thank you all so very much for your time and input today.